and I'll use a music term here, the tempo giusto, the idea of the correct tempo, the idea that every act, moment, activity, person, place has a natural rhythm to it. And if you get as close to that rhythm as possible, that speed, that tempo, then you will do whatever it is better and enjoy it more. So I suppose in essence really what slow is about doing things at the right speed. There are times to be fast, as we all know living in London, but there are also times to be slow. It's about relearning the lost art of shifting gears. Nowadays, many of us are so caught up in the headlong dash of daily life, we're so marinated in this culture of speed that we often lose sight of the damage that all of this running, hurrying, rushing, and busyness does to every aspect of our lives. To our diet and health, to the quality of our work, to our relationships and communities, and of course to the environment. And when we get stuck in fast forward, it often takes a shock to the system, a wake-up call, something that makes us realize that we've forgotten how to slow down and it's doing us real harm. And for many people nowadays, that wake-up call comes in the form of an illness. You know, one day the body just says, I can't take the pace anymore. No frontier is the workplace. Now the idea of slow work is even gathering steam. And it sounds like the oxymoron from hell, doesn't it? I mean, how can you slow down in the workplace? How can we slow the economy without failing? Without, you know, if we slow down there, we're toast, right? But wrong, actually. Because the opposite is true, it seems to me. If we don't slow down at work, if we don't slow down in the economy, we are toast. And we have before us now, in the shape of the global financial meltdown and the credit crunch, the ultimate and most vivid proof of that. Because what went wrong in many ways in recent years is that there was too much speed in the economic system. No one had the time or the incentive even to pick apart these collateralized debt obligations or credit default swaps or derivative contracts to work out whether they were worth the paper they were written on. No one had the time or the incentive to lift up the bonnet and look inside and see if the motor was overheating. It was all about fast growth, fast profits, and fast consumption. And look at the apocalyptic mess that it's left us in. I'm delighted to be talking in the context of slow down London, because one of the things that people assume in a knee-jerk fashion, I think, is that, especially in this country where we think of slow as being so intimately bound up with the rural idyll. You know, you've got to be living in a Constable painting in order to be slow, or in a Cornish cottage or a bothy in the Highlands. And of course you can be slow in those places. In a lot of ways, it's easier to be slow there. But that doesn't mean that you can't be slow in a major metropolis like London. You can be, because ultimately I think slow is a state of mind. It's about how you relate to time, how you feel about time, how you choose to use your time, how you schedule yourself. Movements that really flourish are the ones that take a simple idea, you know, that's slow, do things at the right speed, or, you know, quality over quantity, whatever you want to reduce it to, and just let that just, you know, percolate through the culture and let people pick it up and run with it. So someone in Japan will say, this is my slow life movement, and it might mean something different slightly from what someone in the Rhineland might describe it as, but they're still under the same broad church, and I think that's important. But if you start creating a manifesto and saying this is slow, that's not slow, I think that is the dead hand.
So no signed up members as such?
No, it is frustrating for journalists especially, because they all say, how many members of the slow movement are there? But that's like saying, how many members of the feminist movement are there? Or how many members of the green movement
Although
are there?
you could argue with the slow food movement in Italy and the slow food movement generally, there are paid up members, and there are newsletters, and there are books, and there are special tastings and so on, and you have a special membership card. I mean, I am a slow food member, but so I mean, you could argue you could do it that way as well.
Yeah, within different strands of the broader slow movement, you can have different groups, I suppose, like slow food, that are more structured and more formalized, and
they're important lobby groups as well. I mean, that's where you get the power and the pressure.
And I think they do have a role to play. There's no doubt. I think there's a balance to be struck between having this Wild West open feeling where people can come to the table with their ideas of slow and disagree and argue and do their own thing. But if you're going to change, because it seems to me to bring this slow revolution to fruition, we need to move on two flanks. One is the individual, what you and I do in our own lives, our own companies, our own families. And the second is what we do on the macro level. And some macro things can change bottom up, but others you need organizations that will go and lobby the EU, or will talk to Whitehall, or whatever it is. So there is a role to play there.
There are a lot of skeptics out there, and you have a lot of people you need to convince that this is the right way. I mean, you've got people who say it's a nostalgia movement. It's anti-modernist. You know, there's a lot of skepticism.
There is. There's a lot of. But it seems to me that it's ill-conceived, but I would say that, wouldn't I? Because they're disagreeing with me. But because it's clearly not anti-modern. I mean, if you come across anyone who works in say slow food, or I mean Carlo Petrini, the head of slow food, I mean he's got a BlackBerry. I mean, I love this technology. I think it's wonderful. I just think that we misuse it, and it backfires on us. I think of slow as being gloriously modern, actually, rather than looking back and trying to turn the clock back to a pre-industrial era of rural idylls and John Constable scenarios. It's not that at all. I mean, I think there are so many wonderful things about the modern world, and we could get so much more out of it and thrive so much more if we remember that there are different speeds to do things at. So I feel like it's forward-looking rather than backward.
But what about the criticism, you know, that it's also a movement that's born out of the middle class? It's born out of affluence. I mean, this is very often levelled at the slow movement.
Well, what movement isn't? I would say. I mean,
what movement isn't?
What movement it does not come from the middle class? I mean, the feminist movement, the Green movement, the civil rights movement, that wasn't led by the underclass, I don't think, in my reading of any of those. I think most social movements are driven in the early years anyway, by the middle classes. I mean, those are the people who get out, they're journalists, they articulate things, they're politicians, and they just have the equipment, the intellectual equipment, and the time, often, and the money to bring these ideas to the fore.
There has to be the money. I mean, slow food, for instance, is more expensive than fast food.
Well, actually, that's maybe not necessarily the case. There's a whole range of what slow food can be. Of course, on one end, you have, you know, exquisite truffles at 300 quid a kilo, gathered by ancient pigs in Tuscany. But that's slow food. But slow food can also, on the other end of the spectrum, be chopping up some onions, frying them with a bit of sunflower oil and some tomatoes and some lentils, and making a lentil soup that feeds a family of 5 for 2 days. You know, fast tips for slowing down, I suppose is what we're looking for, isn't it? I mean, the 3 things that I always suggest people start with are, the first is, you know, just do fewer things. We are chronically trying to do too much. We fill time almost out of fear. You know, we see a hole in our diaries and we don't rejoice and relax, we panic. We sort of rush to fill it with more stuff, especially in London. Everybody's always saying, I mean, it's even woven into our vernacular, isn't it? You meet someone in the street that you know, and you say, how are you doing? And you say, busy. You know, you don't have to say anything, it's just busy. And partly that's that kind of machismo of busyness, you know, this kind of swaggering, oh, I'm so busy because I'm so important. But there's also the fact that we are busy. And I think that by being less busy, that's a first step towards slowing down, just doing fewer things. A second comes back to the technology. A little red button that says off, although I noticed recently more than off it tends to stay standby, which is quite telling, I think, isn't it? Never be off, always on. You're always on standby. Push it, you know. I mean, these things are great, but they not only do they invade our private space, so that I'm actually, you know, remember that woman checking email in bed with her husband. When I first heard that story, I thought, I mean, these people are freaks. That doesn't happen in the real world, but actually it does. I mean, there was some research that came out recently that said that 1 in 5 of us now interrupts sex to read a Twitter feed or send an email or make a call. I mean, 1 in 5 of us. And the same thing happens in the workplace. And this is a message, of course, coming from the big high-tech companies now, is that this constant barrage of electronic interruptions makes us less intelligent, that these gadgets have become weapons of mass distraction, if you like. And Hewlett-Packard, big high-tech company, put out a report recently showing that this bombardment of electronic interruptions and distractions causes our IQ level to fall 10 points, which is double the equivalent of smoking marijuana or a joint. That's Hewlett-Packard saying that. It's not an aromatherapy cooperative. You know, it's the big high-tech companies saying, slow the hell down. You know, shut these things off from time to time. So that's tip 2. Unplug. You know, your world will not come to an end if people can't reach you for an hour or 2 on a Sunday morning, or when you're having dinner with your partner in a restaurant on a Friday night. And the final tip is simply to find some kind of ritual, some sort of slow ritual that you can have in your life that acts as a break. And this is something I think that gets steamrollered in this turbocharged, do it all now, do it faster culture, are rituals, little small things